Chapter 3. Adventuring for Beaver Skins. The journey of a little handful of Dutch sailors up the Hudson River as far as Castle Island had failed of its object, yet out of that very failure was to grow the commercial city of New York. To the eyes of Hendrick Hudson's shrewd Dutch mate, as he stood on the deck of the Half Moon and watched the island of Manna-Hatin unfold before him, there could have been no single detail that means Manhattan to us. The piers and bridges, the skyscrapers, the rumble and clatter and roar of today's city would have seemed a fantastic dream. In the place of all this stretched a wilderness of quiet, where tangled vines clung to the trees, where wolves and deer moved silently through the forest, and where only the sound of wind among the branches, the lapping of the water, or an occasional bird call broke the stillness. Ducks and herons splashed in the waters along the shore, kingfishers darted among the shining leaves, and perhaps a bald eagle from the Palisades soared high overhead. Now and then a canoe would glide from the shelter of a little inlet, or from behind one of the wooded islands of the bay, while from the shadowy thickets a startled Indian would show for a moment his painted face and shorn head with its little tuft of hair left growing on one side. It would have seemed to that stolid Dutch mate that only magic could bring about such a transformation as we know. The magic that did bring it about was commerce. The Dutch East India Company, which had paid all the expenses of this apparently unsuccessful journey, had been organized wholly for commerce, and the spirit of barter and exchange was well reflected in the crew of the Half Moon. Those practical eyes saw that while their captain's trail did not lead to the Spice Islands, the new-found wilderness appeared to be teeming with wealth in the form of fur. Enough pelts were carried back to show the kind of animals to be found, and the logbook had a good deal to say about them. Consequently, it was not long before other Dutch craft sailed in through the Narrows for purposes of trade. In 1610 there came a little vessel supposedly commanded by Hudson's ex-mate, which proceeded up the river as far as Albany. Its crew bartered with the Indians, who gladly gave them skins of beavers and other animals in exchange for knives and beads. After them came still other traders, among whom were Captain Hendrick Christiaensen and Captain Adriaen Block, who presently became partners. While it was with the friendly Indians of the Albany district that the earliest trading was done, a few huts were built among the trees on Lower Manhattan, the crude beginnings of a world metropolis. Of course, this temporary little encampment was never meant to be homelike, but the men who had ventured across the ocean for beaver skins were ready for any kind of emergency. Thus, when Captain Block found himself compelled to remain during the winter of 1613, because his ship, the Tiger, was destroyed by fire, he seems to have been no whit discouraged. The woods began promptly to echo the sounds of hammer and saw, and by spring a new vessel was launched and christened the Onrust, or Restless. Up the East River sailed Block on a tour of investigation, carefully mapping his discoveries. The rushing waters that we know as Hellegat appeared on his chart as Hellegat, which may have been suggested by Hellegat, or Channel of the Whirlpool. Once beyond their perils, he sailed in and out of the bays along the Sound, and reached Block Island, to which he gave its name. He discovered that Long Island was indeed surrounded by water, and gave the name New Netherland to all the territory lying between the Connecticut and Delaware rivers. The Onrust set a kind of fashion for exploring in the course of fur gathering, and other traders began to poke curiously about all the streams and bays in the vicinity, looking for fresh trading grounds which they might claim for themselves. Thus the neighborhood of New York became better and better known, and it was commerce that brought this about. Finally, the States General in Holland issued a proclamation that any merchant might have the sole right for 4 voyages a year during a period of 3 years to trade with whatever lands were discovered by him. 13 merchants took advantage of this opportunity to form the New Netherland Company with Christiaensen as a director, and thus, in an unofficial way, he became the first executive of the vaguely defined province out of which New York was to emerge many years later. However, the unfortunate habit of taking native hostages cut short his rule, for one of the 2 Indian boys he carried off to Holland on his first visit proved unforgiving even after he was brought back to his chieftain father and slew his captor. By the time the New Netherland Company's charter had expired, its traders had built a rude outpost near Albany, which they called Fort Nassau, and had concluded an important treaty of peace with the Iroquois. The commercial life of New York was actually beginning to take form, for once in a while a cargo of skins came down the Hudson River, which the Dutch merchants called Mauritius in honor of Prince Maurice of Orange, and was shipped from the little settlement on Manna-Hatin Island to the buyers in Holland. To this day, there is a beaver in the seal of New York City, appropriately recalling how much these timid fur-bearers had to do with its founding.